As far as recession indicators go, a new Now You See Me movie is like DEFCON 1. The magician crime capers have lived in infamy for the past decade plus, their cultural value coming not from their own artistic merit so much as the absurdity of their logistical antics, and the legendary blunder of not naming the second installment Now You Don't. In fact, I think it's pretty safe to speculate that the public outrage over this fumble is what single-handedly greenlit a third installment nearly 10 years later, an opportunity to rectify their mistake. Some call the franchise camp, some call it Fast and Furious with magicians instead of cars, some, like myself, are utterly revolted by the sheer fraudulence of these movies. I remember a friend of mine, who I otherwise respect, sending me the card sequence from the second movie back in the day and being like, man, this is so sick, and it made my blood boil. I can't explain the guttural reaction I had to this moment, especially having not seen the movie itself back then, but I just found it so indicative of what pissed me off about the first movie. The series hinges on the showmanship of these magic tricks that aren't real, and then steps back and asks you to be impressed by what is obviously just CGI. And sure, everyone knows the tricks are almost all CGI, and this may be a silly bone to pick, but my beef with these movies isn't that magic isn't real or that movies are lies. The history of cinema and the history of magic are inextricably linked. So many cinematic techniques were pioneered as magic tricks. There's an accepted buy-in of artifice in both media. We choose to suspend our disbelief that whatever is happening on screen or on stage is real. But when the two are combined, I find that they completely cancel each other out. To offer a perhaps extreme prescription of the two acceptable uses of magic in film, I would say either a character does something diegetically physics-defying, and the magic trick is the illusory filmmaking, or a character does an actual magic trick, and the camera holds a documentary integrity to capture the real physics of the trick. If your character's doing a magic trick, and your mileage is to get the audience to ooh and ah at the supposedly feasible magic trick, but it's executed through cinematic devices, it just becomes redundant and disintegrates any sense of spectacle. Because the characters have an audience in the scene, and the movie has an audience in the real world, pulling these tricks off in a way that only really appeases the real world audience, but still forces the in-movie audience to be impressed anyway, is just cheap filmmaking.
Is this a real magic trick? Some people would say that it isn't.
This is my general philosophy toward the Now You See Me movies, but what if I told you that there is a direct link between this malfunction of showcasing magic and the film's failures on a dramatic level? And what if I told you that, with the latest installment, these hangups begin to take on surprising cultural implications? For a more grounded, trick-by-trick breakdown of how the film's CGI and magic conflict with each other and basically make no sense, check out this video that's popped up in my feed about 1 million times over the past 4 years, which I finally watched in preparation for this video. What I'm interested in today is how, on a theoretical, almost subconscious level, the Now trilogy's attempts to apply the tenets of magic to its own dramatic framework result in not only a completely limp narrative experience, but an ironically strong example of many symptoms of late capitalism. I'll take you through this connection movie by movie over the course of this video, and we'll see how the latest installment, Now You See Me, Now You Don't, is the biggest culprit yet. And it may go without saying, but from here on out, when I use the word magic, I am strictly referring to the performance art medium grounded in real-world physics and illusions. If I refer to anything supernatural, I will use the word sorcery. I know sorcery refers to, like, a specific kind of magic, but trust me, it's just easier this way. And before I get into the thick of it, I should let you know that I have a Patreon where you can find hours and hours of bonus content, exclusive reviews, and more. I'm about to get a little lost in the sauce with these Now You See Me movies, but if you're looking for a more straightforward, guy talks about what he liked and didn't like about a movie style of review, this is more your jam. And depending on your tier, you can even dictate what movies I review. All this and more is just waiting for you over on patreon.com/TaylorJWilliams. So when the first Now You See Me came out, I was not at an age where I was holding movies under the tightest scrutiny. But I remember walking out of the theater and thinking this was the dumbest thing I'd ever seen. The film follows 4 magicians who are recruited by a mysterious force called the Eye to pull off a complex magic trick years in the making. An extended Robin Hood act of redistributing funds from financial institutions to their audiences, including those of corrupt insurance mogul Arthur Tressler, played by Michael Caine. Mark Ruffalo's FBI agent Dylan Rhodes plays a game of cat and mouse with the Four Horsemen, as they call themselves. Meanwhile, Morgan Freeman's Thaddeus Bradley occupies a chemical X role amid all this chaos as a famous TV magician debunker. It's an inherently silly premise, and for starters, very much a relic of the early 2010s. Jesse Eisenberg's signature smugness was still enough of an asset to reliably work as the face of a blockbuster franchise. A Phoenix needle drop caps off the film's credits, and the whole premise of financial vigilantism taps into the last echoes of Occupy Wall Street, which took place right around the time this film was announced, just before it went into production. And actually, one of the things that surprised me rewatching it this time around was the warmth of New York captured on film. It's not overtly romantic in the vein of recent art film adjacent works that very deliberately capture New York on film. I'm more so compelled by the idea that, as recently as 2013, this was still the commercial standard instead of this. It's also related, an entry in a specific subgenre of goofy, slightly high-concept New York action movies characterized by other entries like Limitless, and arguably ended with 21 Bridges. But that feeling of warmth didn't offset the reminders of why I hated this movie when I was 13. Though it takes compulsory shots at the smugness of Eisenberg's J. Daniel Atlas, the film carries the same smug sensibility as its ostensible protagonist. And I use the word ostensible for reasons that will become clear in a couple minutes. While his attitude is lampooned, the things he does are supposed to impress the audience, supposed to evoke a sense of, damn, he's annoying, but he sure can pull off a magic trick. And in this pursuit of impressing, the film devolves into a hodgepodge of CGI. In communicating the dexterous requirements of sleight of hand, the film opens on these digitally doctored cards Atlas is flipping around. I know this is doctored because the VFX company Rodeo includes this scene in their VFX breakdown of the movie. Maybe some of these moves are possible in the hands of a real magician, and they just needed CGI to get Jesse Eisenberg to pull it off. But right off the bat, there's a sense that the film is digitally making simple card tricks appear more complex. Atlas tells us, look
Closer. Because the more you think you see, the easier it'll be to fool you.
But I don't think looking closer does anything to help the illusion in this case. The culminating trick of this opening sequence is Atlas out on the street pulling a very simple "is this your card" maneuver, with a twist. He illuminates the card onto the John Hancock building through its office lights. The card he draws is the Seven of Diamonds, which, full disclosure, is the card I was thinking of. How did it plant this idea in my head, you might be wondering? Well, Atlas flips through the deck twice. The first time each card flashes on screen for exactly 1 frame, while the Seven of Diamonds flashes for 3 frames. The second time, the cards practically blend together through motion blur, but the Seven of Diamonds flashes clearly for 7 or 8 frames. Thus, the Seven of Diamonds dominates our attention, thus, our card is projected onto the building. I highlight this instance of magic because I think there are a few principles that apply to the franchise at large, which can be extrapolated from this moment that happens 1 minute into the first movie. Principle number 1 is the idea of "is this your card" as the baseline fundamental of a magician. "Is this your card" pops up again and again as the barometer by which the magicians judge each other's ability whenever they size each other up. Side note, similar to Atlas's Hancock trick, note that the card we're meant to think of in this trick from the third movie is the only card in sharp focus, subtly influencing us to choose the Four of Hearts. I'll admit it worked on me. And I'm no magician, but the weight ascribed to this very basic trick reminds me of the spit take sequence in Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. Sure, it's a comedy staple. Sure, a good spit take can still hit if done right, but having the comedians practice spit takes like a musician doing scale exercises reeks so transparently of someone outside the world they're writing in, engaging with it purely through broad strokes. Similarly, "Is this your card" is a fundamental of magic, and sure, this movie was written with the consultation of famous magicians, masters of the craft, but like Studio 60, there's a sense of telegraphing the lowest common denominator of magic as shorthand for the medium at large to illustrate this world to the audience that I find, I don't know, hacky. Principle number 2, which I alluded to in the intro, is the redundancy of filmmaking in magic. Now look, I don't purport to know how most magic tricks really work. By the time this movie came out, I had abandoned my Chris Angel magic kit and crossed another potential career path off my list. This is to say, I don't know exactly how the Seven of Diamonds thing was pulled off. This scene is also included in the Rodeo VFX breakdown, so I assume the Seven of Diamonds was just composited onto the other cards, but I could see this working practically if Atlas were to load the deck and stack a bunch of sevens together. After all, we never see him shuffle in the scene. My point here is that because it could be one or the other, though it's most likely CGI, there's a certain integrity that's betrayed, a certain safety net instilled, wherein pulling off the magic trick isn't impressive because it can just be fixed in post. An extension of this concept is how OP hypnotism is in this series, which conveniently allows the magicians to get away with whatever else is otherwise physically impossible. More on that later, though. though. There's no reason why I should care about anything I just described, were it not for principle number 3, which is the film's ostentatiousness. Big spectacle moments like projecting onto the Hancock building with the triumphant music score backing it serve as the movie stepping back and cueing the audience to applaud. But all the Hancock building really does is dress up a simple "is this your card" trick to make it seem more sorcerous than it really is. This is where the David Copperfield of it all comes into play, who is initially credited as an inspiration for the first movie before becoming a full-on co-producer of the second movie. He's certainly the gold standard of this big spectacle brand of magic, and there's a parallel to be drawn between grandiose Hollywood spectacle distracting from what is a largely inert story, and grandiose magic spectacle distracting from what is in reality a basic card trick. And Now You See Me, these two parallels coalesce in the same moment. The things that are supposed to punch up the magic trick are also the things that are supposed to punch up the movie's antics. The things that are so clearly intended to make you go, whoa, how did they do that? But of course, we know the answer. And related to this last point about inert storytelling, there's principle number 4, which is just the general principle of manipulation in this series. The durational difference between the 7 of diamonds and the rest of the cards subliminally influences us to choose the 7 of diamonds as our card. We're shown the information in a skewed way that makes it so that we more or less couldn't have picked a different card. Similarly, the way the film skews the narrative information we receive makes it so that we can't predict the twist. This leads me back to the dramatic material of the film, and I'm gonna have to get into spoilers pretty quickly here, so if you've been holding out on Now You See Me for 12 years and still don't want it spoiled, this is your opportunity to click away. Consider perusing my Patreon in the meantime. Okay, so Dylan Rhodes is essentially introduced as the villain of the film, or at least the villain of the Horsemen. After such an extended prologue endearing us to these 4, Dylan's introduction suggests that he will be the antagonistic specter of the law chasing after them as they execute their scheme. However, once he's introduced, we actually see very little of the Horsemen's internal workings, and over time, the character economy shifts in such a way that Dylan effectively becomes the protagonist, even though Eisenberg is the face of the franchise. Call it a bit of, I don't know, advertising sleight of hand. Reducing characters down to a hero-villain dichotomy can be a bit strict and reductive, but Dylan is the one with a goal and an arc and the general things we associate with a protagonist. While the Horsemen continue their showboating throughout the film's runtime, the 4 characters are basically automatons for the rest of the movie, pulling off the premeditated steps of the plan, a collective Bugs Bunny or Jerry of Tom and Jerry. I'm sure if you did a screen time breakdown, Dylan, like the 7 of diamonds, would occupy more frames of movie than anyone else. I make this comparison again because the movie is manipulating us in some way to buy into the information we are given about Dylan, a man hell-bent on stopping the Horsemen. Turns out at the end of the movie that, plot twist, Dylan was the mastermind behind the whole operation all along, the son of a famous magician whose career was sabotaged and then killed, Lionel Shrike. Dylan has bones to pick with both Thaddeus and Tressler due to what happened to his father, and has selected the 4 horsemen as highly capable pawns in his scheme. In the long lineage of likening plot twists to magic tricks, I have to point out that in both, the information should have been available on some level, but simply overlooked or misdirected from. In The Prestige, the most obviously tempting comparison to draw to this movie, the twist is... Actually, I should do another spoiler pause in case you haven't seen The Prestige. Okay, here it might seem a little cheeky that the reveal is twin brothers when they're played by the same guy, but the clues were there, just teased in such a way that the first time around, most people aren't going to jump to conclusions. Someone who's really tapped in could probably figure it out on first viewing, but in the numbers game, I think most people were fooled. It's misdirection, but not outright dishonesty, because all the character behaviors make sense when you watch it back knowing the full story and who's where at what time. You understand the bipolar nature of Christian Bale's character. Now You See Me, on the other hand, is dishonest. There's no inkling of a clue that Dylan is behind the operation. No early tidbits that come up later, other than, I guess, planting the daddy issues seed. But more importantly, rewatching the movie with knowledge of the twist, his behavior is actively deceptive toward the film's audience, exhibiting his performed behaviors even when there's no one in the scene for him to perform to. In the intro, my diagnosis of the film's magic failures was that, despite seeming to play to both a real-world audience and an in-movie audience, it only really plays to the real-world audience. Where is this concept made clearer than when there's no in-movie audience to speak of? A smaller instance of this same kind of dishonesty is the fake-out death of Dave Franco's Jack Wilder, which occurs in a late second-act chase across the Queensboro Bridge. The car crash is reported on the news, and we cut to reaction shots of the other horsemen watching somberly, shaking their heads in sorrow. They don't actually say anything in the scene, so you could argue that there's no outright lie here, but Clearly, their facial expressions are communicating loss. Compare this to a different plot twist that also hinges on nonverbal communication, The Sixth Sense, in which... Okay, this is a hard video. I'll give you another moment to click away for spoilers. Did I mention that I have a Patreon? Alright, in The Sixth Sense, the scenes with Bruce Willis and his wife seem duplicitous at first. The movie is lying to us by making us think he's interacting with her, but watching a second time, we realize that there's no dialogue that actually betrays her attitude towards him or his distress. It makes sense that she literally just doesn't see him and is distraught because she's in mourning. This double meaning, a plausibility in either the scenario where this is a broken marriage or the scenario where he's dead, justifies the reveal. There's no double meaning behind the horsemen looking somberly at each other like this. And sure, when we then cut to a live stream where they talk about Jack's death, that makes sense because it's a public-facing message. By preempting it with this private moment with no in-movie audience, it's defying logical and emotional reality in the same way that a CGI magic trick defies physical reality. It feels like cheating. I feel 13 again when I use that word, but it feels like cheating, damn it. Fuck. There's a lot of other stuff wrong with these movies, which we don't exactly have time for in the scope of this video, but this is why the movie has driven me so crazy for so many years. In the same way that the first movie is now a 2013 time capsule, the second installment wears many 2016-isms on its sleeve. Daniel Radcliffe was on a mission to fight our knee-jerk association of him with Harry Potter. Early on, the Horsemen continue their vigilante act by exposing a clear Facebook stand-in for data breach, a parallel they surely couldn't have resisted with Eisenberg in the cast. And speaking of Eisenberg, he's sporting a post-Batman vs. Superman buzz cut, a physical totem immortalizing this time period. The film follows the gang being recruited by biotech bro Walter, played by Radcliffe, to steal a chip that can access any computer. Then there's some twists and turns. Walter's actually Tressler's son. They try to kill Dylan, and then they try to kill the Horsemen, unaware that they are in fact broadcasting this attempted murder to a live audience. I think we've established that this is not the most groundbreaking Hollywood franchise, so it should come as no surprise that its second installment follows the sequel formula to a T. Not once but twice do characters say, "It's great to be back." Damn, it feels good to be back. We meet a character's twin brother. The villain is the son of the villain from the first movie. One character is replaced with an almost identical surrogate.
I'm the girl horseman.
And the set pieces seem to attempt many of the same things as the first movie, just on a larger international scale. One can expect then to see the same magic-related pitfalls the first movie suffered from, merely amplified here. The movie first calls attention to the parallel between cinema and magic with this water trick, in which strobe lights function the same way as the slits on a zoetrope, and by extension, the shutter of a movie camera, manipulating movement by putting various isolated snapshots in sequence. Atlas uses this trick to stop the rain and proclaim himself as more powerful than God. And if we keep following this magic as cinema throughline, we get to an implicit assertion of the film director as God. In this case, our god is Mr. John M. Chu. The card scene I referenced earlier, when they're literally heisting the chip, is the most infamous set piece in the movie, but the final reveal, in which it turns out the private jet the Horsemen are murdered in is actually a set on the Thames being televised, is worth some interrogation. Namely, the question of how did they put this all together? Like, did they hire technicians? And I suppose that's the other component of the whole franchise that I haven't addressed yet. The movies take just as much pleasure in explaining how the tricks work as they do in showing the actual tricks. This is where Thaddeus really gets his soapbox, and these explanations are treated like set pieces unto themselves. Think of it structurally like the inverse of a heist film, where instead of the planning sequence and then the action, we get the action and then a rehash of the planning. Only the planning is total bullshit. Certain things they explain, like, oh, they didn't teleport the money, they swapped the trucks. But the holes in these explanations reveal themselves very quickly. For one, a lot of the specifics are just glossed over. For two, hypnotism becomes the catch-all for how many things the Horsemen pull off by inducing other people to do them. And for three, even hypnotism can't explain certain physics-defying moments that nobody seems to interrogate. I don't mean to apply the cinema sins plot hole-centric mode of critique here, but when the films are trying to mine so much from logical explanations, trying to root the absurd antics in the real world, they invite this scrutiny upon themselves. Not least of all does this scrutiny apply to the construction of these massive sets. Sure, chief consultant David Copperfield could do something as abrasive as constructing a plane set on the Thames, but that's because he's a commercial magician with permits and permissions, money to pay laborers, legal standing in the Western world. The Horsemen are fugitives wanted by the FBI and Interpol. Who is doing their manual labor for them? Have they hypnotized construction workers and stagehands, gaffers and key grips, live broadcast editors? And if so, what would the implications be in terms of labor compensation here, especially from a group trying to redistribute wealth? The explanations are all very calculated and going just far enough to make it feel like things have been explained, but not far enough to actually explain them. And that's because, like I've been saying, they're inherently ridiculous. There are certain films that can get away with this level of detachment from reality, such as the Fast and Furious movies, but the premise of those set pieces has nothing to do with affecting feasibility. The premise of those set pieces is, wouldn't it be so sick if a car did this? And that's about all the justification we need. Due to the lineage and audience expectation of magic, by contrast, these set pieces have to be anchored in reality in some way. And sure, there are maybe details left unexplained in the Ocean's movies, but not to the degree this movie does it. This would be like if Danny Ocean said, okay gang, we're gonna have Linus wear a disguise so he can push this cart into a restricted area that Yen will then pop out of and contort himself into the vault. Once Yen has the money, Virgil will use the quantum confabulator to get them out of the casino in a jiffy. You follow up to a certain point, and then you just hit this wall of what? And once again, I find this hollowness to apply to the movie on a dramatic level. There's no reveal quite on the same level as Dylan being the chief architect of the Horsemen, but there are smaller reveals and twists and turns throughout, a constant flip-flopping of, oh, this was all part of the plan actually. Oh, actually, we didn't plan for this part at all. Psych, this was actually part of the plan. Walter tells them the chip has been taken from him by his former business partner, then the Horsemen get it, then there's the oh shit reveal that Walter is Tressler's son. Okay. What does that have to do with the chip? Was that just a coincidence? Were they counting on that luring Dylan there so they could kill him? Was that the grand plan? Then it turns out the Eye is made up of Thaddeus and all the side characters we meet in Macau. And, like, cool? But again, what does that have to do with anything that just happened? It's not like they orchestrated the whole chip saga to take down the Tresslers. And come to think of it, it's not like they orchestrated the plot in the first movie either, since that was all Dylan. What does the Eye actually do? All this whiplash and barrage of questions gets you so lost in the noise of the film, you don't feel any strong desire to go back and interrogate the individual plot beats. It's an attempt at dramatic misdirection that beats the audience into exhaustion and apathy, rather than getting them to simply divert their eyes from the truth. It's like Plankton eating his holographic meatloaf, not tricked, but simply unconcerned that there's no real food on his plate. Because it's competently put together, it feels like a movie, but under any sort of scrutiny, it falls apart. There's some cause and effect, but at every turn, the film tries to reveal that every step was premeditated, and it's just not possible. In a departure from the first movie, the Horsemen actually have something resembling character arcs in this one, but like the magic tricks, most of the character work is deceptively empty. Jack and Lizzie Kaplan's Lula have a romance that hits all the broad, tentpole moments you read about in the screenwriting books, only their relationship is devoid of chemistry, and you don't feel throughout the runtime that there is a genuine connection between them. When they kiss at the end, sure it was telegraphed from the start, but it's completely unearned, and basically it's just doing what it thinks a movie is supposed to do. Woody Harrelson's Merritt has some beef with his twin brother, who is revealed to be the guy from his backstory in the first movie who fucked him over. And though it feels cathartic when Chase gets arrested, there's no real emotional progression getting to that moment. Merritt hates Chase, Chase is a dick to the Horsemen, then he gets defeated. He's entirely a superficial threat. And I know I'm asking for too much here, but why bring this character back into Merritt's life if it's not going to change Merritt's perception of him in any way, or reveal anything new about Merritt's character to us? It's also just by virtue of Chase's faux McConaughey character design and the absurdity of two Woody Harrelsons, one of those things that's almost intentionally too ridiculous to even prod at. The joke's on you for taking it seriously. Thaddeus gets redeemed and basically elevated to god status as the leader of the Eye. And this is where the movie tries to match the first movie's big twist. It's not as appalling as the Dylan Shrike reveal, but it's just as stupid. They try to justify the whole "why didn't you say anything" plot hole this creates in the first movie, and Thaddeus gives some bullshit "you weren't ready yet" speech that, again, sounds nice in the moment, but doesn't actually explain anything. And the last thread I want to point out here is between Dylan and Atlas. Although the movie generally revolves around the mythos of Dylan and Lionel Shrike, who was unfortunately recast from Elias Koteas, no disrespect to this guy, Atlas slots much more neatly into the protagonist role in this one, driving the plot forward and having a goal, etc., etc. He's tired of playing second fiddle to Dylan, and he wants to be the leader of the Horsemen. This seems to be a metatextual reckoning with the characters' respective statuses as the main character. I think it's a little ironic that Atlas is the clearer protagonist of the movie because his resolution is basically accepting that he isn't the protagonist, humbling himself and accepting that Dylan is basically cooler and more based and a better magician than he is, and also has a bigger dick. But there's a moment that really confuses this thread, which is where Atlas has to rally the troops together at their darkest moment. He conjures up a quote from, apparently the man who made him want to be a magician, Lionel Shrike. I think this reference is odd considering the resentment he has toward Dylan throughout most of the film.
You're not our leader anymore, okay? You're not our hero. You're not FBI. You're not a magician. You're not really anything.
It's not impossible that Atlas could at the same time look up to Shrike as an idol and think ill of Dylan, whether that's because he sees Dylan as a magic nepo baby or feels some sort of paternal possession of Shrike, though neither of these is actually the case. Atlas is an egomaniac, sure, but I don't know, this sense of who does this guy think he is just seems incongruent with who Atlas knows he is. Then we get a moment at the end of the movie where Thaddeus tells Dylan,
My suggestion, however, is that you find yourself a successor.
And Atlas walks into the room, which not only feels like franchise baiting, but seems to suggest that Atlas/Eisenberg is the next generation of the franchise, even though he's always been the face of the franchise for both movies. Like everything else I've just talked about, it feels like they were reverse engineering other movies and knew that it felt right to have a moment like this at this point in the movie without conjuring a compelling reason to have it. All of this, the kiss, the Chase arrest, the Thaddeus reveal and explanation, it's all smoke and mirrors, covering up storylines and character arcs that make absolutely no sense. As Atlas tells us at the start of each movie, the closer we look, the more we miss. But what am I missing by performing a close read of how these movies function? In a magic trick, the truth is that there's a logical explanation, sleight of hand or otherwise, but in the Now You See Me franchise, the truth is that the movies are just stupid. This is what they want to distract you from. But one brave soul has to be the guy who takes Now You See Me too seriously. So I'm not stopping here. So now we're caught up to speed. The world is worse than ever, and there's a new Now You See Me movie. In the same way the second one followed the standard sequel formula so strictly, this deviates very little from the Legacy-quel formula established by such films as The Force Awakens. Expectedly, we follow a new generation of magicians carrying the baton from our original heroes, consisting of Charlie, Bosco, and June, played by Justice Smith, Dominic Sessa, and Ariana Greenblatt respectively. Atlas serves the role of old mentor as the horsemen are drawn back together, and this older generation, now estranged since the last installment, slowly rekindles their friendship over the course of the narrative. The plot revolves around a blood diamond MacGuffin protected by Rosamund Pike giving truly the most deranged performance I've seen in years as South African heiress Veronica Vanderburg, and as the horsemen try to stop her, the Legacy-quelisms only continue. A certain character gets the Han Solo treatment, the climactic magic trick is nearly identical to the second movie in coaxing the villain to commit attempted murder in front of a live audience, which strikes me as the same repetition as Starkiller Base being just the Death Star but bigger. Look, it's The Force Awakens. It's just Now You See Me does The Force Awakens. And call that a reductive read, but I promise you, as someone with a little bit of insight into the goings-on of studio executive decision-making, this is the exact kind of thinking that goes into the development of a major IP movie like this. No hyperbole. Actually, let me just lay out the entire plot for you real quick, so we can keep that in mind throughout our discussion here. Spoiler alert, here's my 90th Patreon plug of the video. So yeah, the horsemen are recruited to join this younger generation to get the blood diamond from Veronica. Isla Fisher's Henley is back on the job, but they all hate each other and live separate lives and are lonely and miserable, and also Jack and Lula broke up. They all heist this blood diamond, then they go visit Thaddeus at the Eyes HQ in France. Veronica gets the diamond back by having Merritt, Jack, and June detained, and Lula breaks them out, but Merritt doesn't make it, so she holds him as collateral so that the gang will trade the diamond for him at this F1 event. Okay, I'm losing the thread here. Veronica gets the diamond and traps them in a box. They work together and escape the box. And then Charlie, who's been calling Veronica anonymously throughout the film, delivers the film's big reveal. He is in fact her brother, who she tried to kill as a child, only he survived and became a magician with this lifelong vendetta against her. She tries to kill him, but surprise, she's actually on a set in front of a live audience. You might think that not only is that final act eerily similar to the plane on the Thames, but that Charlie's character reveal and lifelong quest of magician revenge is eerily similar to the Dylan Rhodes reveal from the first movie. And you would be right. In the opening scene, Atlas gives his signature "come closer" monologue, only this time delivering the additional mission statement: magic is showing you the same trick you've already seen and getting you to believe it all over again, which is partly an apt mantra for Lego sequels at large. Soon after this display, in which the horsemen seem to have made a triumphant return to the scene, it's revealed that they are mere illusions on the stage, deep-faked and projected onto a two-dimensional plane by the younger magicians.
J. Daniel Atlas in the house. Who wants to see a magic trick?
And if that doesn't exemplify the Lego sequel model, I don't know what does. But Atlas's opening line also foreshadows how every trick up the movie sleeve is recycled from the first two movies. This seems to be a boastful claim to the audience that we're gonna feed you the exact same slop all over again and you're gonna eat it right up. But we didn't eat it up the first time, so why would we now? Actually, as I say this, I am aware that this movie made a profit and will likely get another installment, and as someone who was seated opening weekend, I directly contributed to that. Fuck, the horseman got me. Really, my biggest fear going into the film wasn't that it would be bad. This was very much a dead dove, do not eat situation. I was more so preemptively lamenting the lack of warmth and texture the first two movies surprisingly have, at least visually. Sometimes. The Hollywood standard is now full digital sheen, and this is certainly a flatter looking movie than the first two, but when it opens on a poster announcing the 4 horsemen in Bushwick, followed by an electric city bike dock, I actually sort of appreciated the cinematography working in tandem with the subject matter of gentrification. Because in many ways, gentrification is another perfect analogy for the Lego sequel, preserving enough of the old fixtures to try and convince you it has the same character as the thing you once loved, but primarily made up of new, sanitized replacements. But Now You See Me is not the first franchise to realize the parallel between gentrification and reboots, nor does this self-awareness alone a good movie make. As for the parallel of magic and dramatic structure, the magic is notably pared down here compared to the previous films. Most of the tricks in this movie boil down to petty theft and distracting people during a heist. There's really only one detour in the movie where the magic component is played up, which I'll be drawing most of my conclusions from. The Eye headquarters they go to in France is a bit of a repetition of the magic shop from the second movie, and here the characters engage in a one-up-a-thon of goofy magic tricks. But what's really noteworthy about this location is that it speaks to, rather than David Copperfield and performance art magic, more of an inspiration from escape rooms and the Museum of Illusions.
If you've ever done an escape room, you'd know there are all kinds of different puzzles.
These two institutions are quite literally products and instruments of gentrification. Escape rooms are sort of like an invasive species, which seem to fill in any recently vacated piece of real estate like a Spirit Halloween. Like with magic, there is an agreed upon buy-in of artifice and fiction going into an escape room, like the facsimile horseman at the start of the movie. The artifacts of an escape room are all pretend, window dressing, cosplay. But the inherent difference between an escape room and a traditional magic act is that it eliminates the performer-audience relationship. The architect of an escape room remains faceless, and whoever goes into one becomes both audience and performer. At risk of drawing too sweeping a cultural conclusion here, I think the prominence of escape rooms has both thrived on and continued to foster the increasingly siphoned off social interactions at the heart of the so-called loneliness epidemic. I could see an argument that escape rooms are inherently social because they require cooperation and teamwork to function, but this is the kind of manufactured teamwork that makes it so perfect for corporate team building exercises, which I would argue is not actually social. Maybe I'm a little skewed because my only experience with an escape room was at a corporate team building exercise through which I did not feel that I got to know my coworkers as people any better, but I think there's a reason my friends and I have not once considered going to an escape room together as a hangout. And then there's the Museum of Illusions, which, despite its veneer of edutainment, is perhaps the apex example of pop museums that have less to do with engaging with pieces of art and culture and history, and more to do with seeing cool, trippy, Instagrammable stuff. I don't mean to entirely glorify museums, as they are often built on elitism and theft and reduce cultures down to small representations, but at least there's a clear dynamic. There's the ticket holder, who is the audience, the spectator, and there's the artifact, the medium through which they are engaging with a given artist or culture, even if in a limited fashion. The way the Museum of Illusions encourages social media posts, it effectively, like escape rooms, turns the ticket holder into both spectator and object of spectatorship. It's not the content of the museum they are consuming, rather, they are consuming themselves in the museum. I know this all sounds a bit tangential to the Now You See Me franchise, but this is the cultural foundation upon which the new movie is laid. Per the social social media posts the Museum of Illusions is reduced to, this movie seems to follow the current Hollywood MO of baking in as many TikTokable clips as possible, evidenced by the fan cams posted by the movie's official TikTok page. Movies themselves are losing the audience-performer relationship. Reduced to clips, the audience is now in complete control of what they see and don't see. If this sounds like fear-mongering or doomerism, it's only because I work in film production, and the people I know who are getting the most work right now are working on vertical features that are by design broken up into 90 one-minute reels. So I guess I should give Now You Don't some props for being a real movie that was released theatrically, but it appears Lionsgate is, at least indirectly, hopping on the bandwagon. In a broader sense, this shift in the audience-performer dynamic speaks to the idea that people are generally more skeptical of the media they consume than they were a decade ago. The film's Gen Z demographic is far less susceptible to the oohing and awing expected of the first two movies.
Upside down Rome. Cool.
Cool? Is nothing impressive to you?
This is a generation who wants to be not only in on, but ahead of the joke. This is why Gen Z humor is so frequently characterized as esoteric and intentionally cryptic. I think this is the other appeal of the Museum of Illusions, the idea that, in the same breath that it tricks you, it also explains the trick to you, instilling a sense that you are in on it, and not being fooled. And I could probably branch off from here and say this has something to do with meta-modernism, but the bottom line I'm trying to get to here is that we shouldn't give audiences complete control. We shouldn't let them know everything. I think the most forward-thinking art right now, which actually challenges audiences rather than bolster their sense of control, is art that blurs the line between reality and fiction. And look, I don't expect the blockbuster magician movies to do anything experimental or risky, but what I'm saying is that for as much as the latest movie attempts to appeal to a younger audience through semantic signifiers like Gen Z slang and intergenerational quibbling, as much as it seems to be speaking to modern themes,
What did you type fictional magician name into ChatGPT?
and as much as its anti-capitalist veneer has become an even stronger asset to the series over time, the film's dramatic framework is incredibly reactionary. Its dependence on older iconography, copied and pasted story beats, and demonstrably safe and revenue-generating narrative templates make it impossible to actually engage the younger generation in a meaningful way. This is the root cause of everything in Now You Don't feeling so sanitized, why it feels like narrative gentrification, why every character, old and new, is completely flattened. The new characters are a broad sampler of what Gen Z looks like to a Hollywood executive, and the legacy characters are homogenized into just the older generation. In the first movies, the character dynamics were dynamic, because each of the four horsemen brought a different flavor, a different style of magic, and a different personality to the table, a clashing of heads. The movies kept some sense of baseline engagement because of the internal friction at play. Here, they come off as identical curmudgeons. Do you really expect me to believe that Jack, a character whose catchphrase is
"Nothing's ever locked,"
and if nothing else is an active professional magician, would look at a door and go, "Oh, there's no keyhole, I can't open this thing"? Of course not. But the movie needed to get a Gen Z dunk in there, so this aspect of Jack's character is shaved away. This is one small example, but I think it's very demonstrative of the superficial means through which the franchise tries to modernize itself and connect with current audiences, and the utterly ghoulish, inhuman result. Of course, like I said, the movie's doing pretty well. Holographic Mark Ruffalo wouldn't make a special appearance if they didn't think they were getting another movie, and I would not be surprised if Now You See Me was back on the menu for a while. But seeing it go from a goofy relic of the 2010s to an ongoing corporate sludge fest is not very surprising, but a little depressing. What do we learn from all this? That dumb magician movies are dumb? That Hollywood likes a good cash grab? It's not a particularly novel conclusion to say we need more risk-taking in cinema, and the optimist would even argue that reliable mid-tier movies like this enable more risk-taking. But I certainly don't see that reality reflected in front of me, and until I do, my only option is to become the Thaddeus Bradley of movies. That's it for me this time around. I feel like I can't plug my Patreon again, so maybe I'll just redirect you to those music videos I keep talking about. Music videos. Alright, well, thanks for watching, and goodbye.